Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 29, the season 2 finale. Very excited for the show tonight. But before I get to that, I'll just remind everybody that this show is all about everything prospecting, but especially prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team dynasty league with a glorious 20 minor league spots for each roster for a total of 600 prospects, which keeps us very busy talking about prospecting, which is what we're going to do tonight. And I have a very esteemed panel tonight joining this show, which I'm very excited for. So without further ado, let me introduce my guests. I have Evan, a new member of the ABL, owner of the Houston Astros. We have Tom, also a recent member of the ABL, owner of the Chicago White Sox, not his beloved Red Sox, but maybe that's a story for another day. And Jeff, owner of the St. Louis Cardinals, and all three of these guys are in other leagues with me as well. And Jeff has just survived Armageddon in Tampa Bay, so very pleased that he could join the show and is able to join the show and actually has internet connection. So these are all good things. We count our blessings. So welcome, guys. Thanks very much. I know it's late in the evening, on the East Coast, so we're gonna jump right in. There are a lot of topics I wanted to cover tonight. And I think the first topic that I had on our agenda, and I'm particularly interested because we have a veteran owner in the ABL with just Jeff, and we have two relatively new owners, and I'm somewhere in the middle. And the first topic is what prospecting lessons have you taken away from your experience in ABL in 2025? Maybe we'll start with one of the new owners on this. So, Evan, do you want to take the first shot at this?
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me. Lessons. I'm not sure. I think this was definitely the year where I dived into pitching prospects, like more so than I ever have before. I think mainly just because of how deep the league is, how deep of a points league it is, and just the weight that these pitchers have. But I was thinking about it, and I think it was just a product of the year as well. I think that most of the prospects that I liked during the year, the pop-up ones, were pitchers, right? Like I'm trying to think back of who the hitters, like the breakout prospect hitters were. And I could list off a bunch of pitchers before I name a hitter that I really liked, So it was nice how that coincided with being in ABL and trying to build my prospects in ABL around all these pitchers that I really liked. And, it led to me having basically 10 hitters and 10 pitchers rostered, which is not something. I've never had a balanced hitter and pitcher prospect roster on my own team.
When you were on the show earlier this year, I mean, and that was at the very beginning of the season, really. I think it was the third episode of the year or something like that. We talked a little bit about your reticence to roster pitching prospects for a lot of the traditional reasons, but you even suggested back then that maybe you were going to take a different approach.
Right.
And you in fact did relative to the leagues.
Yeah.
As you dove into the pitchers, what was it that kind of attracted you to these guys, or how did you go about discerning which ones you were going to pick? Because there are blurbs that come up about all kinds of prospects and pitchers in particular. There's small sample sizes that you have to deal with too with them as well. But what was your process?
A lot of it was the fact that I wanted to have pitchers who are close to the majors. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times you have these breakout pitchers that are off the radar, who are older. And I think those pitchers are just slightly more valuable in this league, right? Trying to find guys who are 23, 24 years old. A lot of the college arms that come out of the draft, I think those are guys that I was targeting, trying to find college arms who were not the marquee ones. And, a lot of those guys just got a lot of press, had good years, and were on the map to the point where I felt like I needed them. And, at the same time, they're valuable in ABL for as pieces trade. So plus there are so many of them,
Yeah.
and you could, if you're on top of things, you could trade them, you can move them around, and you can add another one for $1.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Although some people do it for $2, which always mystifies me, but it does
Right.
happen. All right. Well, yeah, we'll come back to some of these themes because I think proximity, as we've talked about on the show a bunch, is certainly a factor that influences a lot of ABL owners, and I think with pitchers in particular, because you can, the auction price for the pitchers is so high that getting a cheap young pitcher can really pay dividends in so many different ways, and they are valuable trade assets as a result. But Tom, like this is also your first year, and you kind of inherited a very different roster than Evan inherited.
Mhm.
One that was clearly going to have a hard time competing in 2025,
Sure.
and was very heavy on top prospects. So I know you've taken kind of a very different approach with prospecting as a result. But I'm wondering what your experience has been in year one, and kind of did anything surprise you? Did you learn anything in particular? Things are going to change going into 2025.
So I think echoing some of Evan's points. I mean, if I look at most of the leagues I've participated until now, it's primarily been roto format, um, and not only not head to head, but not points. Um, so those two factors, the fact that it's head to head and the fact that it's points, creates a significant kind of overweighted value to pitching, which previously was, as I believe I had the exact same sentiment. I think the first time I was on here when we were doing the crushes and fades segment, that is a staple of this podcast. I believe my first ever fade on this podcast was pitching prospects as a whole, right? And obviously that's just not a tenable strategy in this league. So I think similarly to Evan's point, I think in my minor leagues I have 6 or 7 pitchers. I recently graduated Jackson Job and guys that are essentially prospects. I guess they still qualify as prospect terms, but
Mhm.
maybe not for ABL rules. But so I was definitely much more heavily weighted to pitching based on that, and so that was kind of new. Trying looking at the number of arms, 22 to 23-year-old. Again, the proximity to the majors as well, but those older arms that historically are not the value point. If you look at my behavior, and to take Lorge as an example, another league that we share, where in recent history I've traded Sixto Sanchez before he or right as he was at the majors, Nate Pearson right as he was hitting the majors, guys like that are players that I may have acquired at the age of 18, 19, and then would look to flip before they hit the majors or as they hit the majors. Those are examples of it working out. Spencer Strider, an example of it not working out. But there are pitching, the list of pitching prospects that I historically discard as they reach that age is normally is significantly higher than it has been in ABL. So I think an approach, that's a change in my standard approach. In terms of lessons learned or kind of for going forward, something I plan to do a little differently, not to completely put my cards on the table, but I found that in such a deep league, the draft picks that go second round, third round, fourth round, fifth round, once you're talking about the 120th FYPD eligible prospect, our ability to forecast that is very very poor compared to the pop-up value of pop-up kind of newly minted pitchers that throw harder in spring training. So that information that comes after the
Mhm.
FYPD league happens in ABL, means in my eyes that in a lot of cases I'm probably going to be reserving a few additional spaces, even if they're even if I use the draft pick and hold that extra 20th prospect. The plan will almost be to have that be a fungible spot
Mhm.
to grab some of those guys. There were a bunch of guys that I had interest in this year, with some success and some failures, but nonetheless, I think there's more value to be had in those types of prospects,
Mhm.
than some of the later picks, where some of the guys that I may have liked coming into the year based on reports or very thin amounts of information. Once, as I said, once you're getting into that 120th, 160th player, it's not quite the or 150th player, it's not quite the same value basically as some of the guys you can pick up early on in the season. So I think those are probably the 2 points. And then I think the last thing I was going to address is I understand that Evan didn't have any, pop-up prospects on the hitting side because they happen to all be on the Red Sox. If you think about, Roman Anthony coming from the high 70s, high 80s as a pitching ranking to probably the number one guy, Christian Campbell, Justin Garcia, all those guys, they happen to play for, the best farm system in baseball. So
Well done.
I'll leave it at that.
It's
Well
a good
done.
plug. We had a little Red Sox Yankees rivalry for those who don't know going on here.
The person
So
We're
in the
we
draft
haven't
at all
we haven't
is
we haven't seen
here's
Bill's
his name.
best in like 6 years, so I figured I had to do something to
right, spice it up.
level the playing field a little bit.
One of the things I was going to say in terms of lessons learned is it dovetails, Tom, with something you just said, which is the ability to get guys on the wire who can replace dudes you draft in the third, fourth, and fifth round. And I think the longer that I've been in the league, the more open I am to punting draft picks in those middle areas, and actually using draft picks to acquire prospects that are closer to the majors. So, for example, I just picked up Gracefo, the Cardinals pitcher. He's 24. He's got, dual position ability, and he's, probably going to be in the majors next year, and he's on a look-see contract. But I spent a third-round draft pick to acquire him rather than, investing in some, mid-range prospect that I could probably just replace during the season with another pop-up guy. I thought that was a better use of my pick. And I used a first-round draft pick and some other assets. It was a multiplayer and draft pick trade, but to pick up Kevin Alcantara for the Cubs, who may be having a hard time finding playing time in Chicago, but he's on another look-see contract, and he's an interesting prospect that's close to the majors. Because I think for me, one of the things I saw change in the league for the better, in my view, is that we were getting, better and better owners coming into the league. We've had a lot of new owners come in the last couple of years, and I think each one of them has been an incremental improvement to the league, which is great and how it should be. But what that has done is it's made prospecting kind of more competitive on the whole, and you're starting to see a real timing dynamic to when prospects are picked up. There's a group of us that picks up guys pretty early on. I was willing to hold them and wait for them to become popular in the mainstream prospecting, journal, publications or on Twitter, and then selling them and then replenishing. And that's kind of been my, approach to prospecting for the most part. I try to get in early on guys and then just hold them until they become popular. And I can usually tell that because, there's a wave of owners who start asking me about the prospect. And then I know if I wait another 2 weeks, there'll be another wave. And so it's just a matter of like how long I want to wait to monetize. And then in the meantime, I can go start targeting other dudes who are not going to be popular for another 3 months or 6 weeks, whatever it is. And start, queuing those guys up in the waiver wire in my, watch list or whatever you want to call it. So I think it's interesting to me that at least from my part, you have to start, being more aggressive earlier in the process to nab the pop-up guys. So I think for me, I actually got mostly my pop-up guys were hitters this year. And I just got in on them very, very early, which has risks. I mean, you are doing it on less data, but if you do a combination of looking for the data that matters to you and the scouting that you trust, you can identify those guys and roster them. And then I just have the downside of that is you have to wait a really long time for people to catch up in a lot of instances. And so actually, like, the three of you on the phone, on the show tonight will start asking me about guys earlier. Right. And that's usually a first like benchmark to whether like the guy's becoming popular enough. And then there's a second, third, and fourth wave of dudes. And then, also I'll see any one of you guys beat me to one of the dudes I'm watching. Right. So there's there's a group of us owners who is really willing to dive in early on pop-ups. I think Evan's right. He nabbed a lot of the pitching ones this year. And the only one I had was Alejandro Rosario of Texas, who kind of fits that mold of being a college arm that had a bad senior year and fell down draft board, so he was available in the pool. And then the Rangers got a hold of him and changed some stuff in his delivery and his pitch repertoire, and he had a breakout year and just went crazy. And now I'm starting to get asked about him in trade discussions by people who aren't prospect counts. Because now he's caught up enough. He's like become like a top whatever prospect. I don't know where he is in publications, but you're starting to see him on these lists, right? So that's been the biggest lesson for me, I think, is just like really being more aggressive early on in the offseason, being willing to like cut bait with guys who are 4th, 5th round draft picks. But Jeff, what about you? You're kind of like the veteran of this group, at least. You've been in the league since it started. What did you take away from 2024 in terms of prospecting?
I'm going to go a little different route. So part of my approach in this league, and I've seen it happen time after time with the teams that have been really successful up until this year, has been mainly viewing prospects as trade capital, really, like not really intending on them ever becoming contributors to your team. Just if your team is competitive at the trade deadline, your top prospects can fetch superstars and push you over the top. I know that the Royals rode that to the championship big time last year. Mm-hmm. But this year was very different when you look at the teams that actually won. And I spent some time looking at the Pirates and the Tigers and what I did on my team. And I actually did kind of go for it. I traded Rhett Lauder, who was my number 1 pick, for Correa, Jansen, and Neris. And that ended up being a really stupid move because Lauder looks great. And I love Lauder at the time. Actually I talked with, I think both Thomas and Evan about him, and you too, Steve, before the draft even happened, that he was my guy, and I was really excited to draft him. And but I traded him down, and neither Correa and Jansen or Neris helped me at all in the playoffs. Of course, I lost to Duke again for like the 3rd straight year. And
you picked Duke.
I did, but I mean, he beat everybody else too, except for John. So. But when I look at the Pirates, like they didn't make any trades at the deadline, and instead, like they were buoyed by their prospects that got promoted. I mean, there was Gunnar, of course, which came up there through his system, and then Lawrence Butler, Kyle Manzardo, Jackson Merrill, Keider Montero, all those guys were who knocked me out specifically. And he's got them all for $1, and they all came up this year. If he traded them for Correa and Danny Jansen, he would have been much worse off, of course.
Yeah. Well, Duke does a lot of his work during the off season.
Yeah, it's true.
Where he loads up, on these guys, and he's already doing it again.
Right.
And he's selling off high contracts for prospects rather than doing it at the deadline when you're trying to do the reverse. We have actually a question from Dylan, who recently joined the league and has been a guest on this podcast prior to his ABL affiliation with the Las Vegas A's. But anybody want to field his question? Should he sell high on Gary Gilhill?
I've tried to get Gary Gilhill from Dylan already, so I'll.
So
He meets my cool name criteria.
Yeah,
like I just love his name so much. I also asked about Gary Gilhill. Yes.
No, see, there you go. This is probably a good indication that you maybe want to hold him for another couple of weeks until other people learn about. What about you, Tom?
So I actually have not asked about Gary Gilhill, but my answer was going to be no to selling him. It seems like he's still, the arrow's pointing up, and I think he's bubbling into that perspective where you start to hear his name crop up on lists, and when somebody's posting their top 10 starting pitchers, you start to see him on there. And the helium is really picking up. So I think selling now is kind of selling at the base of that that upswing. Might as well wait for a little bit more upswing, even if you don't plan to graduate him. He's got another year plus easily in the minors of development. And I think any success, I believe it's AA now. Is that where he's up to?
I think that's right, but I haven't looked at it in a little bit.
I'm just doing this off the top of my head. I should have probably looked it up before, kind of guessing at that. But one way,
so if there is a prospect you see on someone else's roster that you really want, Hill could be someone that you could dangle.
Sure, of course. I mean, my point is simply you're basically, there's no specific catalyst for me to sell him, right? I see somebody who's still got runway to, the value is not priced in, the upside is not priced in, excuse me. That's where I was
Yeah.
trying to go.
So the only thing I'll say on the other side of this debate is that Hill was a prospect that I was watching for a long time. Because he started being written about in Baseball America, and I was getting some blurbs from guys who saw him like early in the season, and I was monitoring his like strikeout percentage, and it did not wow me. I don't know where he netted out, but I just remember watching it early on. I just declined picking him up because the strikeout percentage was not spectacular, and the walk to strikeout ratio was not spectacular. It wasn't bad. None of these metrics were bad, but I just didn't see kind of something that really popped off the screen to me. And I do wonder, as he kind of gets more advanced and faces tougher hitting competition, whether it's going to catch up with him. So in some respects, it may be an opportunity to sell high on Hill. I think you've got, it's a little bit like having the tiger by the tail. You don't know, if you let go of him now, maybe you'll regret it. But on the other hand, I don't know.
There's some Rays kind of juice that comes with pitching prospects, right? So many have come up through that system and ended up working out. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them have. And that's not true with every organization. So when you see a pitching prospect start to catch some helium in the Rays, it might be different this year since they're probably going to play in a minor league ballpark, but most Rays pitchers are definitely just valuable in and of themselves.
Yeah, for sure. No.
Yeah, to correct that point, he's only up to single A. So I think my sweet spot for selling tends to be when they hit that double A. Success in double A tends to be the peak value for a pitcher if you're not planning to graduate them. Once you start getting into that double A, triple A, the triple A hitters tend to be the ones that are a little bit more polished, where the relying on just secondaries doesn't work. If you have that premium fastball, a lot of times that alone can also carry you. So you get those two polarized types of pitchers, the fastball only guys or the secondary only guys with that junk fastball tend to be the guys that can succeed up through double A, and then triple A tends to be a little bit of that place where you see the K rate come down and some of the concerns become verbalized by the mainstream, if you will.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the point that I was trying to make in terms of like assessing the risk of how long holding him too long.
Right. I mean, do you really want to trade a double A or triple A arm that is great? Like, do you really want to cash that out in this league? I don't know. I would trade Gary Gilhill. Like, first of all, I don't know if he's had surgery yet. Like,
I don't believe
that's going to happen. Besides the fact that it happens to every Tampa arm. I don't know that for sure, but like, he's in single A and he's like an extremely buzzy name.
Yeah.
Like you could turn that $1 buzzy prospect arm into, a $7 shortstop, right? That
Maybe.
starts for you. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of how that's like a lesson type of thing that I'm taking from this league.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're able to actually cash in, I mean, it always is a question of what the return is, right? But like, you get a guy who's like really jazzed up on a guy like Hill. I mean, I think he's an interesting prospect and I like him, but I don't think he's great.
Right. Exactly. He's a good pitching prospect.
Yeah. Yeah. In contrast, like I think Tom this year, if I remember correctly, did you acquire Job?
I did.
Yeah. So like, he was a guy that I was when you made that trade, I think I sent you a comment about it. That I was like, surprised that he was moved. And, I thought that was a great acquisition because not only is he really skilled, but he was, the guy who was like doing it at a high level and was going to get promoted. And in fact, did get promoted.
Right.
And he's, probably going to be a staple of your rotation for several years. Right.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a guy you can max out if you want. And
Right. I mean, I think there with any young pitcher, I think there's risk. I mean, Bobby Miller is case in point of that, right? I think there's guys like that you can absolutely fall in love with, and they get to the majors. They may even have some success early on in the majors, and that's not necessarily predictive of the short-term success.
Yeah.
I do think, I think there's 2 points, which is A, what do you pay to acquire those said pitchers, and what are you receiving for Gary Hill, to use an example. I mean, I actually probably have Job in a different tier than Gary
Oh,
Hill, but
yeah.
the point being that, with any market, it's all about, what's the price of that asset that you're getting, right? I think you can make the argument to buy or to sell any of those players at depending on the price.
Sure.
And I think, as it relates to Job specifically, I think I, I think that's the type of pitcher that's and then that upper tier, right? If you're talking about the other pitcher I inquired about was Andrew Painter, right? Like it was kind of, those were the 2 names I was shopping. And that's the thought there is those guys, if it's not Paul Skeens level tier, there's probably another tier below that, right? I think that are these kinds of pitchers.
Yep.
And if you can get them, they tend to be the ones that even their downside outcome tends to be good enough that in a league like this will still have value. And that's probably
Wow.
what I'm hoping for. I think everybody's dreaming on, the Tarek Skubal outcome. I'd be pretty happy with a mid-rotation starter that, gives me 150 innings and a, 3.5,
Oh yeah.
4-ish
At
ERA.
that
Right?
cost in this league, that's a
Right,
home
right.
run.
That's the goal, right? Is to just stockpile as many of those types of players as possible. I think, the stars are great, but the depth in this league is such that I think if you can have a roster, I mean, if you look at a lot of the rosters, it's not necessarily all stars. It's the teams that have, consistent production at every spot that tend to be successful. At least this year, it's 1 year sample, but that's
No,
that's
I
the
mean,
takeaway
Jeff,
for
do
me.
you agree with that, Jeff? Over the long term, your experience in ABL?
There's no question. Yeah, I mean, depth is king in ABL, and the value of a $3 or $5 pitcher that's giving you 150 innings is immense, because that frees up salary to address your other needs in the auction. And yeah, I mean, there's no question that that's the move, and that, I mean, I agree with Evan's point that if you have a pitcher that's on the verge of that, that's a pretty good chance he's going to contribute heavily in the rotation for a major league team. It's hard to trade that away, because you can almost bank on that and draft one less pitcher and put your resources towards your other needs.
Yep. Yep. So let's transition a little bit and talk about the next agenda item, which was, do these lessons that you've learned from ABL, do they even transfer over to your other league, given how deep this league is, how many prospects we're, rostering, or, do you, does it benefit you in any way in your other leagues? And if so, how? And maybe Jeff, will start with you since you've been here the longest.
Yeah, I mean, it benefits me to have prospect hounds like you guys in the league, because I see you pick up players that I've never heard of, and then I go look into them. And I mean, that's true. There's about 10 people in ABL that anytime they pick somebody up, if it's a name that I don't know of, I immediately look into them, and check their stats, see what they've been doing lately, try to figure out what they might have caught a wind of. I mean, a lot of times it's Baseball America mentioning them or something, but I mean, I understand. And if you guys are into them, there's a reason why, because a lot of times you have to drop somebody pretty decent to get them. So
Yep.
20 prospects seems like a lot, but if you're deep into prospecting, you can churn through that pretty quickly. And it's usually, most drops that I make kind of hurt at this point. There's a reason they're on my roster.
Yeah. Oh, that raises an interesting point that I'll touch on before turning to the other guys, Jeff. Is that one of the things I did this year was I was much more patient with my prospects and holding guys that I have in the year past, and it really goes to the point that you just made. Like, I have a process for evaluating prospects, and I've got to actually stick to it sometimes, right? Because I end up regretting the fact that I picked up a guy and cut him. And one example is Pablo Guerrero, who is a guy that I picked up originally. If you go look at his player history in this league, I was the first person to get him, right? I got impatient with him, cut him. Tom picks him up this year, right? This guy was still watching. Like, he wasn't off my radar screen. Tom picks him up, trades him, to get value. And I think he just got traded again, right? But, he's a guy who's being monetized in the league. And if I just kind of held on to him, that could have been me, right? So sometimes you really want to hold on to the dudes you pick up and just ride out the bad wave. So I think there is, with the 20 prospects, it does seem like a lot, but it does end up, precluding you from making some moves. And I actually traded away a bunch of my fab this year, in part because I was going to take a more patient approach. But what about you, Tom? I mean, your first time in the league, is there anything that you would take away in terms of applying it to the other leagues you're in? Obviously, in some of our leagues that we're in, it's not. But
Right. I think. I mean, it varies. What's interesting is it's very similar, but also very different, right? I think there's if I look at the leagues just that you and I share, I mean, there's a league where prospect like Jackson Chorio was available to pick up at the end of last year, kind of a thing, right? When it was clear he was going to make the majors, Dylan Cruz, so on and so forth, right? So that probably like the transferability of prospecting in this league versus that league obviously don't transfer at
Yeah,
all. And then there's probably the middle ground of the league that we all share, the Lorge League, where the difference with that league is it's open free agency, where you can basically, it's fastest click, basically, I guess is the way it's been described. It's where you can pick up a guy at any time, right? At 2
yep,
o'clock in the morning, you see a guy, 6 o'clock in the morning, noon at lunch, you pick up a guy. One click and he's on your roster. And there has been a few times, knowing the watchful eyes and having seen prior transactions get mirrored in ABL, where I've said, okay, let me hold off on a click there,
yeah,
make the transaction in ABL, and then directly following the waiver run, adding him to my roster. I think Elvin Garcia was a guy like that, and a couple of guys that I picked up in some places that end up on other rosters a day later or something like that. So there's been some strategy associated with that, and just thinking about where the leagues are. I think the biggest thing I would say that transfers across any other league is the depth of this league effectively forces you to be as skilled a player as you can be. I would argue that the degree of difficulty of this league versus any league that I'm in is significantly higher in ABL versus any other. So it's effectively a place where you're sharpening your skill sets, right?
right,
You're forced to kind of be brushed up on certain names that you otherwise would ignore, names that you figure you can pick. Even in that league, right? I ended up picking. I made a big trade with Jeff in the midseason. I picked up Christian Campbell on the back of that. Christian Campbell had been picked up a few weeks earlier, by somebody in this league. So things like that, where there's guys, that are widely available in most leagues, are not in ABL. So I think
yeah,
that's where you're scraping so far into the barrel that it's forcing you to kind of know every corner of the universe, of the prospect universe.
yeah,
So I'd say that's probably number one. I think the values are so different that's where I'd say it doesn't necessarily transfer over,
yeah,
right? That's probably the one thing that you have to be careful of, is not, there's certain players that are extremely valuable in ABL because of either the contract or the position or the way that they accrue points, that don't necessarily translate into the more traditional roto universe that a lot of my other leagues are based in. So I think there's some things that definitely transfer, and then some things that just don't, that are unique to ABL, if you will.
yeah. It's so funny that you mentioned, like, being in the league with different people and structuring your transactions in terms of timing, because this happens to me all the time when I want to pick up a dude.
Yeah.
I actually stagger my moves so that the league where I have,
I
like,
noticed the same happening with Giancarlo Lara, for example, on your team with those two teams. So
yeah,
things like that have been noticed.
yeah, so like, because we have to put waivers in here versus in Lorge where we don't have to, and so, like, there's always this internal debate now. And now that all of you guys are in that, in both leagues, right? Like, okay, well, if I pick up a guy in Lorge, right, am I going to lose the waiver claim in the ABL, right? Or do I, like, pick him up in the ABL because it's more valuable to have an ABL and
Right.
run the risk of one of you guys seeing it and, like, going to pick up the dude?
Right.
And then you're in the situation where if you, like, you actually will time it so that you're picking up the dude in Lorge at like 10:59 a.m. Right? So there's no time for you guys to run in and put a claim in on him, which is something that I've done because I'm sick many times. It'd be interesting to go back and look at the timestamps.
I like the anytime pickups in Lords, though. I'm not going to change it. I think it's
I think it's great. I think it
Oh, no,
makes
it's
for a
great.
whole
It's
different.
great.
Yeah, it's great. It's its own animal all in of itself.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
So, Evan, what about you?
So true though with the two leagues. Like,
So,
seriously.
lessons? Do you think it transfers, or what are your thoughts, Evan?
No, not for me. Like, ABL is a totally different strategy animal for me, like, in a lot of respects. But I find it to be like its own sort of game, and because of that, I treat the prospects differently, down to like who exactly I'm adding or not. So yeah, it's hard. I'm trying to think of like how it translates. because this is really the only league I play like this. This is the only league that works with fab and prospects, or daily fab, right? That's the thing. I have another league that's a weekly fab league, so like every like Sunday night or whatever, the fab will run. But yeah, timing it, it's very hard. You know, I've lost out on guys I really wanted in ABL because I've got in my head about like when, you know, Joe beat me on Jesus Made, who I did get in Lorge. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like I put the other Brewers guy ahead of him in my priority. I like went back and forth on who I wanted, who I needed. I didn't think anybody else was going to be adding him at that time. Then all of a sudden the waivers run and like Joe added like 7 guys, like 4 of them that I wanted.
Yeah.
And it like totally threw me off.
I mean, so, the point about like I'm getting earlier and earlier in pulling the trigger on some of the hitters.
Yeah.
Just like,
yes, I think that next year I'm gonna have to just pull the trigger on guys.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and that's really the only way to do it. All right, so let's transition into something that's new to the show, but I'm very excited because I've been trying to get a trade to actually happen on the show, on the program. So this is a game called Trade Machine, and I gave each one of you a homework assignment, right? So Tom, you're going to be up first, and the way this is going to work, I assigned you like to try to construct a trade between 2 of the guests on the show. All right. So your assignment, Tom, was like you were supposed to come up with a potential trade between Jeff and me. All right. And Jeff, you were supposed to do Tom and Evan. And then Evan has a wild card, and he can do whatever he wants in terms of suggesting a trade. So I'm very interested to see what Evan comes up with. And then at the end, we'll decide if anybody wants to make one of the trades. All right. And if nobody does, you'll never be back on the show. So, so Tom, why don't we start with you? What's your proposed trade?
So I was trying to keep it simple. I started going down the road of like, do I look at like the numbers in the farm and try to add the picks so that the number of picks add up to the expected graduations in 26 and make that argument? And I was like, I'm not going to spend this much time on this. So I'm going to keep it I'm going to keep it very simple. 1 for 1, and I admit to being kind of the counterfactual guy with a lot of stuff, so I may be totally off on these values. I have my own views, and sometimes they are very different than the market. So I apologize if the market values are off, but I do believe the intrinsic values are reasonably close. I know there are so. I looked at my my counterparties here, and I said, okay, let me think about who likes what type of player and what can I justify one way or the other. So there's a name, and I have a feeling he may have already been on Steve's roster. I didn't even bother to look at the history. There's a guy by the name of Carlos Jorge on Jeff's roster. And I thought let's start there. So that was one side of the deal, and then on the other side, I said, what do I know about Jeff? So mid Cardinals prospects, right? So Dakota Roby is a rehabbing arm who's got some interesting pedigree, was a former top 100 arm. I know Steve, is not afraid to take a shot on a potentially interesting pitcher. Jeff is not worried to take, not concerned with taking shots on interesting pitchers, even if they've got a little bit of injury concerns. So Dakota Roby is probably on his way down compared to his peak value. Carlos Jorge probably still on the way up, but hasn't fully peaked because he was kind of interesting 2 years ago, became a little more interesting this year, but didn't pop the way we wanted to. So both guys have the potential to pop. Neither are probably top 100 prospects, but both could realistically get there this year should they perform to the maximum of their outcomes. So there you go. There's your simple 1 for 1 without kind of going too far into the weeds.
I love it. So I think that Jeff and I have actually traded Carlos Jorge with each other before, not in this league, but in some other league. I think we've actually traded.
I know we've talked about Jorge for sure.
Yeah. Just looking at Jorge's stats here.
I think Jorge's value, in my opinion, is on the way down, though. Similar to Roby. They kind of have similar trajectories. They both were kind of
Yeah, you can make the
fringe.
argument that both have like that like lost luster to
Yeah,
still be a top 100 prospect with kind of
right.
with an incredible year this year, but possibly have disappointed
They're
enough
both
that they're kind of fading a little bit, so they're
they're
kind of
both names that
roster fringe.
prospectors know as well. So
Jorge had a terrible season, by the way.
yeah.
He,
He had a hot streak in late summer where I thought he was coming around, but overall it was disappointing.
he hit 220.
Roby has a shoulder injury, so I figured you can point the warts to both sides.
Oh, sure. I mean, I did just trade for Roby. So I mean, there is a little recent history there. So for my money, I bought low on him. And I was doing that because I wanted to. He's got proximity as a pitcher. And if he's healthy enough next year, I suspect, given what the Cardinals are going to do, he's actually going to be in the majors.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thinking behind acquiring him. But that's an interesting idea. I like that. So, Jeff, we don't have to make a decision right now. You can think about that, and I'll give it some thought. But I know Jorge has been traditionally one of your guys.
He has, but I've dangled him in several trade talks, even this offseason. So he's definitely available if he's someone out there still a Jorge guy.
Yeah, well, and I think I even identified him as a guy at the trade deadline that you might be willing to sell and might get some value for, or that he's a guy somebody you should target on your roster, right? I think Jorge was one of the names I used. All right, well, we're off to a good start. I like this. So now, Jeff, you were given the assignment of like constructing a trade between Tom and Evan.
Yes.
So I'm interested to see what you came up with.
It's like North Korea, South Korea here. Let's better make it happen.
Wait, who's North?
I believe Rourke referred to me as North Korea at one point, so I guess I get the lucky. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. I cut you off.
Oh, you're good. So I'll go ahead and say the trade, and then I'll explain my thoughts behind it. The trade is Evan is going to send Grant Taylor to the White Sox, and Thomas is going to send Ronnie Mauricio to the Astros. Behind it, Thomas has shortstop covered. He's got Rafaela this year. I think he'll use him at shortstop, depending on what he does in the auction. But he's got a stable of shortstops coming with Marcelo Mayer and Emil Morales, who I love. And so long term, necessarily, he doesn't necessarily need Mauricio. From Evan's side, he's got J.P. Crawford, who he's been dangling in trade talks. I don't know if he's going to re-sign him or not. It's probably borderline. Probably waffles day by day whether or not he's going to keep him. Shortstop's kind of ugly in the auction, but Crawford kind of sucks. And Mauricio would be an upgrade, in my opinion. Grant Taylor, he's a big beefy guy. He's an exciting arm. He's got crazy high spin rates. He does play for the White Sox, and it seems like most of the pitchers that come up for the White Sox don't do great. But MLB White Sox, he's not perfect. He's got kind of a mixed bag of stats, but he's got a little bit of helium with him. Most ranking systems you'll find out there have Mauricio considerably higher than Taylor, but personally, I think that I have him valued about the same. And from Tom's perspective, though, his system is the strongest in the league, in my opinion. He kind of it's not even close. But the one place I do think his hitting is stronger than his pitching. So a chance to beef up his pitching stable would be welcome.
Interesting. So, Tom, any reactions to this?
It's interesting. I mean, if there's a sucker for injured pitchers, it's me, right? So I think a guy with probably red flagged by a bunch of teams in the draft, et cetera. Probably a first round talent with second round draft pick because of the injuries, or the injury risk at least. Interesting. I mean, Mauricio doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that I would extract max value from a guy like Evan from. So that's where I see that as being.
What's Mauricio's contract? $15 right now?
No, it's $9. Luciano is $15.
Okay.
So that's probably. I mean, that's the one thought, and I think the only other thought is I'm the guy who keeps harping on the buy low, sell high thing, right? And it's Mauricio feels like the helium comes back once we see him in a Mets uniform again, right? I think spring training, you see him out there running, stealing a couple bases, hitting a ball country mile. that would probably be my hesitancy. But I suppose Taylor coming in with, you know, a stuff plus grade that's in the 110s would also do the same thing, right? 120s of stuff plus in one spring outing probably gets him on a bunch of prospect lists as well. So that's my quick reaction. I'll give you my final verdict after, you know, Evan gets a chance to react as well.
Yeah, so Evan, go ahead. Shoot, the floor is yours.
I mean, I love this trade. Grant Taylor was going to be my crush. I love Grant Taylor. I picked him up everywhere. But I would trade him for Ronnie Mauricio.
Wow! All right, there you go. There you go.
I think Tom says no. I wouldn't even offer this to Tom. I would, if I owned Mauricio, I would say no. I'm not trying to
even with the $9 contract.
Even on a $9 contract, because I think so. He's a $9 2040.
Correct.
I would have to look into what his actual contract situation is.
Yeah.
I think Mauricio plays a lot next year for the Mets.
You very well may. I mean, at $9 and if he's a 2040, if that's right, you have to extend him this year if you're going to keep him.
Right. So I would have to, or I could give him
the arbitration thing.
Oh, right. We have this new arbitration thing, right?
Right. That's $13. So
yeah.
So I think he could be worth it. And with for me, if my roster is set up in a way where I can afford to pay a little more for somebody like that, a couple of dollars more, I would. I really like Ronnie Mauricio. I think, you know, he looks like he's shortstop eligible right now.
Yeah.
I think he's going to play third.
Right.
I guess I don't know if he keeps the shortstop. So, you know, Mauricio specifically has some things to look into for this league. But as far as this 1-for-1 goes, I would take Mauricio.
All right, interesting. So, really, question whether Tom wants this White Sox pitcher. So
a very good White Sox pitcher.
You can think about it. You can think about it, Tom. But I'm going to come back at the end after Evan gets a chance to do his wild card. You know, you can make the final verdict. All right. So Evan,
yes,
you were given like the freedom to concoct any trade as wild as you wanted amongst the four of us.
Yeah, mine is not wild. We all did the least amount of work possible. I'm proud of everybody. I made a Tom and Jeff trade.
Okay.
So Jeff, and it's very similar to these trades. Jeff sends Red Sox superstar pitcher Yordany Monegro to Tom, who I think he's liked in the past. I'm sort of in on Red Sox pitchers. They have like their new pitcher regime or whatever. Hall of Famer Andrew Bailey running the show. But I still like Yordany Monegro a lot. Strikeout guy, probably is a starter. I think I want to say he was in like high A, but you know, I think he gets to Boston pretty soon. And I think in this league, I mean, first of all, we have a bunch of Red Sox guys. He's a pitcher. He's a pitcher who, if he's good, he's gonna rocket ship up. Because I think he's been a buzzy name in the past. I don't know if he dealt with injury or not.
He did a little bit.
But I like him, and I think people like him. So Jeff sends Monegro. Tom will give Drew Jones.
Interesting.
And I don't really know where Tom is like currently at on Drew Jones. I think he's really liked him even when he's been terrible, which is fine. But I think Drew, I just like this trade because it's sort of like two names who are definitely not at the value that they're going to like end up at, you know, at least like when they're like on the verge of debuting, right? They're either going to be way higher or way lower. So it's sort of like a gambly trade of like some decent names. I mean, unless you like still love Drew Jones.
So Tom inherited Drew Jones, right? I mean,
right.
In this league, I did, yes.
Right, he was like, drafted very high, a couple years ago. by the prior White Sox owner. And the question is that, does he have two shoulders? Like, are the shoulders part of the trade? Do the shoulders come over in the trade? So Evan's saying yes. So Tom, you would be,
I mean, you got to take the shoulders.
Yeah,
Can the shoulders swing so that the ball, leaves the infield? Can
Right.
that happen?
That's for me. It's the ground ball rate thing. There's a swing change that you need to change the attack angle, and if you do that, there's a chance at a slightly more interesting, center fielder, good solid center field defense with, enough pop, like the exit velocities are there, that if he can, can hit the ball in the air, that's something there, because the K rate's just doesn't seem like it's gonna get to a point where he's gonna be a high average, high contact hitter. So it's gonna have to be a power driven center field profile.
Right.
But what if it does? Like the thing about Drew Jones is that all you need is to fix one thing.
Right. He needs to hit 20 bombs from center field, and he's a major leaguer. If that's where
I mean, or he's like a top 10 prospect. Like if he comes out next year and like is batting 330 or whatever and hitting home runs.
See, that's the thing.
I don't know if he's ever going to bat 330.
But no, obviously nobody bats 330.
I mean, I think he could bat 230.
But right, like, can he figure something out and bat like 280 in the minors and show power?
I mean, he hit 275 this year, right? So it's not like he can't, but that's a 400 BABIP, and it's a 30, close to 30% K rate. I don't know where he ended up, but I from memory it was over 30. It's just under 30. But the point
not in 19 Jones.
And that's the funny thing is you're basically teeing me up to defend Drew Jones, even though I'm selling Drew Jones.
Tom is salivating at this Red Sox pitching prospect. I can tell. So.
I mean, that's the thing. I'm actually not a huge Monegro guy. I was early on him. My concern with him is there was an injury this year. There's the fastball has some questions about its playability. So, and the secondaries are there to start. He's an interesting pitcher. I think the upside is somewhat capped. That being said, in a league like ABL, I think I'll jump the gun here and kind of say I would probably turn this down from the perspective of just the fact that I still have hopes for Drew Jones being a viable player. And there is like that, that pedigree side where you figure, to your point, Evan, like some performance gets you that kind of added value just because of the pedigree. Even if the track record doesn't necessarily justify, the short-term performance will likely return greater value. I think there's a version of the world where Monegro is the more valuable long-term ABL asset, right? Very, very easily you can see the world where, Jones is basically a glorified Ken Broxton type, high K center fielder that just, has some power but can never get to it because the contact and the exit, the launch angle doesn't work basically at the major league level. And Monegro becomes a fifth starter type with 3.5 to 4 ERA, again, to use that same kind of range of playable but not star pitcher in ABL. But I just think the value, the capturable value of Jones performing at all in the short term, I think is still outweighs that of the potential outcome of Monegro. And there's still a version of the world where he can be a viable, it's not a fifth percentile outcome. It's probably a 25th or 30th percentile outcome where he still is somebody that, can play in the major leagues and be because of the defense, kind of sticks in center field and plays for a decent Diamondbacks team where he's a valid asset in ABL in a way that Monegro can be as well, right? And I think if you kind of remove the star in your eyes of like he can be this superstar that he was drafted 1 or 2 overall to be, and you just kind of hope for those more kind of mediocre outcomes, I think that those are all still pretty viable at this stage.
All right. So Jeff, you've been radio silent over there. So what are your thoughts on this potential trade?
I like it. I mean, I made a very similar trade in Flug to get Drew Jones right before the season last year. I traded Noble Meyer for him, and that's a smaller league. It's a 16-team league with 12 prospects, and honestly, Drew Jones has been on the fringe of my roster. And after the FYPD this year, I might have to drop him. So I mean, it's kind of like keep waiting for him to explode, and it just never seems to happen.
Would you trade Monegro for Jones though?
I don't think I would.
You wouldn't. Interesting.
I think I would. Yeah, I mean,
Interesting.
Monegro he started off pretty rough last year, but in the second half, he was money. I mean, he was
Performance is undeniable.
yeah. He was the Red Sox pitcher of the year in the minor leagues the year before, and then he kind of got hurt in spring training, scuffled for a while. But when he found it in the second half, he was right back on.
Lights out.
Yeah. So I have high hopes for him. He's probably my favorite pitching prospect I have on my team. And so I think I'll probably pass on it, but it's close. I think it's a good trade.
Interesting. All right, so that's a no from both sides.
That's interesting. I was going to say that's the best kind of deal, right? If both guys are happy with their own guy.
All right, so they both like their own dudes. All right, so let's go to the first trade that was suggested, which was between Jeff and me. And so, Jeff, what's your reaction to the Carlos Jorge Roby suggestion?
I would probably do it, but I don't think you would, Steve. It's like I said, I'm kind of Jorge is someone that I'm pretty much out on at this point. Honestly, I have him, but he's one of my first cuts for sure.
Yeah, I just acquired Roby, right?
Right.
And for a reason. I acquired him because he's like at that age where he's going to get promoted and he's going to be a guy that I don't know what he's going to become in terms of a pitcher, but as we've talked about on the show already, I think he's going to have value in this league because he's going to like get innings. He's going to be in the rotation regularly because the Cardinals have a very old rotation. They're going to have to shake things up and bring up some of these young guys and give them opportunities.
Right.
I think you're going to see Roby if he's healthy. I mean, that's a big question mark, right? But if he can stay healthy and pitch, I think you're going to see him, get those innings in his first year. Probably this year in the second half. In 2025, he gets promoted. Again, assuming health. And so that was the theory behind acquiring him. And I just wonder, given the value of pitching in the league and his upside when he's healthy about being a 4-pitch starting pitcher who can, has mid-rotation upside, probably a 4, or a 5.
Yeah.
He could be a 3, depending on how
a lot of people talking about him before the season last year. He just he's had a bad year. I don't know. He might have been hurt.
He got hurt. I mean, he had a lower back issue. He had a shoulder issue, and it definitely impacted his performance. But part of my thinking in acquiring him was that it was a buy low, right? Because of that. So I think the talent is there. And Jorge's a guy that I actually like a little bit because he's also a buy low. But I just think to me, he's a guy you acquire for less than Roby at this stage. He's a guy you can acquire potentially for a draft pick. And like you said, you may cut him, right? So maybe you don't, but maybe he's your like 19th, 20th guy.
Yeah, he's one of those fringy guys that a pop up might show up that I would drop Jorge for if a month or so into the season. Wouldn't surprise me at all, especially if he gets started slow again.
Yeah. All right, so we're striking out on these trades. We're striking out. They're interesting ideas, but we're striking out. So what about Jeff's suggestion of, that was an Evan Tom trade.
Done. I'll send it over.
Yeah, I was to say, yeah. So I think Evan kind of hinted at it. I mean, I think as I mentioned before, I think the Mauricio thing, I mean, I'd have to look more closely at the contracts to really see if there's, if for some odd reason I decide that just the $9 to $13, or I guess the $11 to $13 is not affordable within my contract structure. But seeing that my current plan looks like I have, pretty low cost basis for next year, I just don't see how, potential full-time player isn't worth holding on to. I think I would be much more apt to sell if you see the Mets, coming off a good playoff run, all of a sudden are active in free agency and have filled up all these spots and are, completely blocking Mauricio. if I see that they are kind of holding that spot open with some of the off-season moves, that's to me a clear sign that he's going to play. And I'd rather have that information before making a choice. One of the specific reasons I targeted Mauricio in the draft last year, and thanks to Kevin for bidding him up to 9 from the 5 that I hope to get him for, is that he basically brings a bunch of optionality, right? I saw him as a instant 60 ADL, so he would create an open roster spot as soon as possible in ABL. He would be 2040 as a contract, which could give me that extra extension year to kind of give me some flexibility to kind of evaluate his value. And because I was hoping we would see him at the end of this year and get a sense of his value, and then have that extra year kind of to get kind of that double look. But basically, all of that optionality that comes with that player versus a prospect that's going to be at 2050 for the foreseeable future. I suppose some of the AFL information could move the needle if you believe in that. I'm someone who, I mean, probably on the pitching side more than the hitting side, would be interested to see what the AFL reports. I believe that Taylor's going to the AFL. I thought I saw that somewhere. And if that's the case, potentially if it's like looking healthy, secondary is grading out, because there's some StatCast data on some of those Arizona parks. So, if you get some data that suggests that there's something more interesting there, I suppose there's a little bit of upside. But if you're looking at the current value of those assets, for me, it's Mauricio retains more optionality for the time being, and more upside to price in that isn't currently priced at a guy that we haven't seen in 18 months.
But I'm hearing it's a possibility of a definite maybe.
For me, it's a no today, and call me again in March, kind of a thing, or April, or whenever the trading window opens again.
All right. Well, the best laid plans of mice and men. This did not result in trade, which I'll reluctantly bring you guys all back on the show. But I appreciate the creativity of
not a shocker either, for what it's worth, considering the effort put into defining the moves, and then also the likelihood that any of us prospect hounds are going to part with any of our dearly beloved, children, for lack of a better term.
Right. Well, so to me, like the ones that can work out is when like somebody has a player that we know the other person likes, and vice versa.
That's where I was going with the Jorge thing. I figured there was a shot that Jorge still held some little piece of value in your dark, cold heart, but not
Yeah.
me.
A little bit. A little bit, maybe a 4th round pick. That's probably where we are on Jorge. All right, so let's transition. The last 2 segments of the show, I asked you guys to think about what minor league rosters kind of like put fear in your belly as we head into 2025 from the ABL. And so, Tom, since you have the prospect system that has been ranked number 1 the last 2 years in the prospect handbook, maybe we'll start with you, so you can exclude yourself from the answer. And as you look around the league, is there any system that particularly creates concerns on the horizon for you?
Well, I think for me, and this is, I guess it always depends how you want to call what you call the system, right? For me, it's the pipeline, right? Because it's everything from how close some of these guys are and how valuable they are right now, but then it's also those recent graduates, to me, kind of all fits in that same window. So the team that really stands out to me is the Tigers, right? I look at John's team and I just look at, not only does he have the team that's coming off the championship, he's got Tamar Johnson, who has lost some shine. Ethan Salas was lost some shine, but then you keep going down the line. You got Carson Williams. You got his recent acquisition of Emmanuel Rodriguez, the extra 1st round pick that I gave away, if you listen to some people, to get somebody off of his roster, things like that, right? If you go down his list, I and Will Warren's another name I like. Tink Hence is a name that I personally am out on, but I think is someone that a lot of people really, really like and think has upside to be,
Tink Hence has been a subject on this show many times.
I don't want to relitigate Tink Hence, but I would say some people would value him as high as up as potentially an ace, right? And so I think if you take all of those things together and then take into account that he's got recently graduated, Chorio, et cetera, when you take that existing cost structure of a successful team with undervalued major league assets plus that farm, I think that's the model franchise, if you will.
Yeah, I think the only person who projects Tink Hence as an ace is his girlfriend.
I bet there's somebody in our 30-team league who still believes in that.
Maybe one of the Cardinal fans in the league, and you got two of them on the line here.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't think Jeff or I think he's an ace, but all right, well that's fair. I mean, look, John is obviously a very strong owner in the league. He just won the league, but he always performs well. He had a rebuild or a soft rebuild last year, but he definitely has a good system, and he's always up in the rankings that I do preseason. He's always pretty high. So that's interesting, and it does suggest the competition in the AL Central is going to continue to be pretty fierce as we move forward.
Three first round picks, as I mentioned. I mentioned one of them, but he has 3 first round picks. Just looking at his roster now.
Yeah. So Evan, what about you?
Yeah, Detroit was definitely on my list, top of my list. I mean, the good teams are teams that have good farms, and it's like not surprising. Detroit, Pittsburgh. There's a couple other teams that have guys that I just personally like. I think Cleveland, Mark in Cleveland, he has a bunch of guys I really like. Rourke on the Giants, he's got it. He knows what he's doing. So, everybody on this call, obviously, you see it. It works out if you have the good prospects and you're on top of things. Your team is good. You end up doing pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, going to points we talked about during the year. I mean, the teams that perform well also have the prospects to trade if they want to, right? And the acumen to go collect new prospects to replace them. And that's what you kind of consistently see, and also target prospects in the offseason to like replenish.
Yeah.
And for me, go ahead.
No, just having the cycle like Tom was talking about, allows you to have the depth that you really need in this league. Like it's not only that you need the depth, you need depth to succeed, but having the cheap and affordable depth is really key, and is part of what I'm trying to do.
Yep.
Just have, fill your bench with guys who are going to get at bats and are like a couple of bucks, so I can go into the auction and fill holes with, bigger numbers. I don't have to like tell you guys.
Yep. Yep. No, definitely. So for me, on the same theme, that the team as I look at them, I mean, there are a lot of good systems, and obviously Tom, has like a ridiculous system, and I think we're all just excluding him because we're being polite. He's going to have the number one minor league system in the handbook next year. I'm pretty sure of that. Just going in, and I think we don't need the handbook to tell us that. Just looking at it, but the team that concerns me is the Pirates. And just Duke's ability to not trade any of his guys and then go out and acquire more of them, for his his contracts that are very high. It's just staggering. People joke about not trading with Duke, and then people do trade with them. What are you guys doing?
But it's a product of his, having the farm, right?
Yeah.
So when he has Pete Alonso, and I can afford Pete Alonso, or I can, and I can afford to acquire him by giving prospects, perhaps even overpaying prospects.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a strategy thing.
Yeah, Duke, Jeff mentioned Lawrence Butler earlier. That was the guy I picked up and monetized and traded.
Yeah.
And then Duke comes around and acquires him from the owner I traded him to, right? Robbie Snelling is another guy I drafted and traded to Sam, and now he's on Duke's team, right? He just goes around and picks up these dudes all the time. And he's got Montez, who he acquired from you, Evan, in the Alonso trade, right? Who was also a subject of a lot of conversation on the show during the year. He's going to be well positioned to be competitive again, which is not surprising. He's going to give Jeff headaches again, it's a model that he has. He just keeps doing it every single year. It's very impressive, and there's a reason why I refer to him as the Godfather, even though he has not won the league in 2 years. He's come pretty darn close. So Jeff, what about you?
So I thought Tink Hintz was an ace until my sweet darling Quinn Matthews came into my life, and now he's the great hope of St. Louis Cardinals pitching. But in ABL, Quinn Matthews is on the Angels, and I actually decided to pick them as my team because Cal's done a really good job of restocking his system, and a lot of the guys are getting pretty close. And he's got Quinn Matthews. He's also got Mike McGreevy, who looked really good for the Cardinals at the end of the year. Just as exciting as Quinn Matthews, he's got Chase Dollander, who is probably the best Rockies pitching prospect since Ubaldo. You know, he looked amazing this year. Also has Chase Hampton, who was
a prospect. He may be ever. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Dollander might be the best Rockies prospect ever. Ubaldo wasn't that as a prospect, right?
Yeah. I've watched a lot of video on Dollander, and he blew me away for sure. I don't know if he could beat Coors. You know, we'll find out.
Coors is undefeated.
Yes, it is. The bats on Cal's Angels are pretty solid as well. He's got some guys I really like Cooper Pratt, Josue Persino, Hector Rodriguez, and of course the superstar of the AFL is Zahir Hope. And that's a solid start. And I think Cal's going to make some noise this year.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure Cal will be glad to hear that because he's been waiting for a bust out in the ABL. So. You know, he can finally tier himself in a better tier. When he ranks teams during his podcast.
I do think Quinn Matthews will see his time in St. Louis this year. He's been on a rocket ship. So.
Yeah, if he's healthy, he's going to be. There's a really good shot he'll be up during the season at some point. Interesting. And Tom, you gave me yours already, right? So
yeah,
we covered the waterfront. Interesting as always. I look forward to the prospect handbook. With Tom's able assistance, I'm going to have some tweaks to it this year. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have Tom's math skills. So, but we're going to concoct some new formulas for 2025. So let's talk about, which is always my favorite segment, crushes and fades. And Evan, you hinted that you one of your crushes already. So why don't we start with you and see what else you have in the tank, and if you have any fades too.
Okay, I have to regroup here for a second because Grant Taylor, he really was going to be my crush. I really like him.
You can talk about him.
Yeah, no, I just quickly, probably not enough to get Ronnie Mauricio, to be fair. But he's a pitcher I really like. He was at LSU with Paul Skeens. He had Tommy John, I think. I don't know when exactly, but I think he was rehabbing when the draft happened. And I like that he's had the surgery. He came back this year. He came back in the middle of the season, had a couple of starts for one of the White Sox affiliates, I guess the low A one. And he was really showing SP 1-2 kind of stuff. Has a deep arsenal, I think 4 or 5 pitches. I think he's a big stuff plus model type of pitch guy, good fastball, all that stuff. And just to me, really checks all the boxes of a top echelon pitching prospect. Because for me, with the pitching prospects, like we were saying earlier, with Job versus Gary Gill-Hill, it's really 2 different things entirely. The way I think about Gary Gill-Hill, if I own him, is totally different than the way I think about Jackson Job if I own him in this league, and what I want to do with them as far as holding them, moving them, all that stuff. So for me, Grant Taylor is a guy who is kind of off the radar, but also checks all my boxes to become a Job type. So that's a big crush of mine who I added everywhere. I'm going to try to stick to my roster.
Okay.
I don't want to just name other names. I don't want to give anything away. I'm sorry. I'm not doing that.
That means you're going to fade somebody out of your roster?
I'm going to fade somebody on my roster named Brandon Sproat, who I acquired with Lazaro Montes in that trade.
Yep.
And I really like Brandon Sproat. I think he's a good pitcher, but I do not think he's in that category with Jackson Job. And you know, the deal for me there is that I think a lot of people might think that he's in that type of category. I think he's like universally ranked top 100. I think he you know, he might be like top 50 everywhere. Had a monster year. You know, 24 years old on the Mets. People love the Mets arms. So like, I just think he's appealing to a lot of people. Even like not the super duper prospect hound guys.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously I'm like praising him. When he got to AAA, he faltered a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what happened. I can't like cite numbers or anything, but I know he just sort of became regular, and I don't really like a regular looking pitching prospect. Like, if all I really want in a pitching prospect that I'm going to hold or invest in or like care about keeping is if you're like an incredibly dominant starting pitcher in the minors. If you're not dominant in the minors, I would consider trading you. You know, I think in ABL especially, all you need is arms in the big leagues. I'm not looking for a superstar starting pitcher in ABL. I'm looking for 12 starting pitchers on my roster.
Right.
Who can give me innings, who are not like 3-inning guys. Give me 10 Trevor Williams. Don't give me 10 Trevor Williams.
You're trying to. Have you finally traded Trevor Williams, or is he still on your roster?
Trevor Williams, $3.
Yeah.
Was very good this year. Just want to say.
He's been on the block a few times.
Yeah, but you know, he's good to have.
Well, I had Trevor Williams on my roster in this league.
Oh, you did?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Well, now I do, and he's available.
I know. There you go.
But you know what I mean? Like, I don't really need to hold pitching prospects for very long. As much as I said I like fell for pitching prospects this year and wanted to have a bunch of them, I wanted to have a bunch of them to like mitigate my risk with pitchers.
Right.
You know, I just want to have a bunch of names. I want to have a bunch of like 24, 25-year-old guys who are going to get a chance soon, right? Yep. AAA random guys who nobody's ever heard of. Ryan Gusto on the Astros was supposed to start like the last day of the season, I think. Thankfully did not. I can keep him in my minors. But, you know, guys like that.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, he was actually one of the guys on your roster. If I had been assigned to trade, you know, that I would have targeted moving off of your team to try to cash out on. You know, because I think, you know, when you made that trade in season, you know, and I covered that trade as one of the ones that was interesting to me. That, you know, when the dump deadline, you know, came around, I didn't really talk about him, although he was a hot prospect at the time. And I remember you made a comment about, like, you know, he was like another piece in that trade, right? And you know, I had a little bit of doubt about like how that was gonna project as he got further up in the minors, and I think he saw a little bit of a wall maybe. And some of the things we were talking about on the show earlier about, you know, facing tougher hitters. And I think he could be fine. He could go back down there and be fine. But, you know, he's 24, right? And he's like, you know, kind of in a position where he should be able to dominate those hitters. Like if he's really going to be like as big as, you know, pitcher as people have been boasting about him being. So I thought he was a good guy to maybe move. And you might have some takers in the league if you try to move. Maybe do it before they watch this podcast. But
who knows what I'm thinking?
Yeah, Jeff, why don't we give you a turn? Crushes and fades. Besides Carlos Jorge.
Yeah. I know last time I did this with you, I professed my deep love for Mason Wynn before the season and called him the next Ozzie Smith, and he's well on his way. He had a great year.
He had a very nice season. I don't know if he's the next Ozzie Smith, but he had a very good season.
He's going to be here long enough. We'll see.
Oh.
So I picked my own player as one of my own players as a crush. I wanted someone that I had on a bunch of different teams, and I went ahead and picked Johnny Formello. I know he's falling off radars a little bit because he tore his ACL back in June, but turns out he spent most of the season rehabbing with Ronald Acuna, so I'm sure he's soaking in some of Acuna's goodness there.
He's soaking in some of his athleticism. I don't know.
Yeah. He's already so athletic. That's the thing. Is he's got such a crazy, powerful left-handed swing. Like when you watch him hit the ball, he's like it's almost Trout-like. I know he's left-handed, but like it's a real short swing, but it still generates crazy exit velocities. And he's fast. Hopefully, still fast after he comes back from his ACL. But he'll steal a ton of bases, hit a ton of power. I really think the way he was trending before his injury, he would probably be a top 50, maybe even top 25 prospect everywhere if he hadn't got hurt.
Yeah.
And it's stacked. I mean, the Mariners system is absolutely stacked with bats, but personally, I like Vermelo more than Emerson or Young, and pretty close to Montes, just because I think he's the total package.
That's great. I like him too. I think he's a good prospect. Right? He's a perfectly good crush as far as I'm concerned.
On the fade side, it's a little bit of confirmation bias on my part because we've talked about this before, but I generally fade high school pitchers in first-year player drafts. So I picked Noblemeyer as my fade, and I know I'm not the only one there, but with high school pitchers in first-year player drafts, with me, it's just there's just too much time for them to get to the majors, and that's a lot of time for them to get hurt, and they probably will. And high school pitching stats mean absolutely nothing to me because they're pitching against people like me, who's on a high school baseball team. And, that's not nearly as impressive as a guy that racks up strikeouts in the SEC from my point of view. But I know there's plenty of high school pitchers that have worked out, and
Sure.
I think Steve, when we were having this conversation last time, you hit me with like a Baseball America or somewhere a PowerPoint that showed me that I'm totally wrong on this, but
it was an article from Baseball HQ.
Yeah, that's right.
Which talked about the statistical, likelihood that a player is going to reach the majors and be productive, and the high school pitchers actually outperform college arms on the whole. Like any stat, like you have to there are going to be outliers on either side, but if you're betting, the premise of the article is that you should bet on the high school pitchers who get drafted early. And I think part of the theory is that these pitchers who are able to skip college and go right to the minor leagues, they're so talented that when they're being drafted that high, there's a reason they get drafted that high, by all the scouts. And again, it's just proven out over the years with the numbers. But you're also certainly right that the proximity is an issue for them because they have to take longer to get there. And this is not one of the things about fantasy baseball that's just very different. I think everybody on this show appreciates it. It's not about building a major league roster through your farm system, right? I mean, when you have a major league player go down in baseball, you can't just call AAA.
Right.
And bring a guy up, right? I mean, it's like, there's no correlation. And waiting on a guy who's 19 years old, to get to the major leagues, that's an asset that, can go up in value, down in value at any point. Whereas a guy like Brett Lauder, who's like 22 at the time he was drafted or whatever it is, he's got to be in the majors pretty soon. You can monetize that more quickly. And you're probably going to get more value for him. So it's a very different calculus if you're in a league like ours where it's so deep versus, let's say, like Lorge, where you have 16 teams. Maybe you're willing to wait on a guy like Noblemeyer. You're like, all right, well, I can wait on this guy and draft him because I have enough depth. There's enough other arms I can accumulate at the major league level. So, but I get it. I mean, he was not spectacular this year.
It was also terrible this year. I mean, he walked 17.9% of people. That's awful. And in A ball, not against quality hitters, and ERA was over 5. And he might still put it together. Of course, he's still got plus pitches and has all the talent in the world. And it's just a baby. But he won't be on any of my teams.
There you go. You've gotten rid of him in one league, like you already talked about having Delvin. So Tom, what about you?
I'm trying to decide if I start with a crusher or fade. I guess I'll start negative so we can end on a high note. How about that? So in terms of a fade, we actually mentioned him earlier and again, I'm going to stick to my own team, and there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek element in that it's not someone that you maybe go out and sell, but it's someone that I would temper expectations on, and that's Job. I think Jackson Job is a very, very talented pitcher, but a very unfinished product. I mean, he was in Double A to start the year and was hurt part of the year, was quite good and performant there. The stuff definitely grades out to be major league level. So he should, I believe, once a pitcher shows major league pitches, should be pitching in the majors because there's not a whole lot to learn, embarrassing Double A hitters. But I don't know that he's ready to be this ace that we all expect him to be, right? I think there's a lot of stuff that's not. I mean, you look at the performance; it's very small sample in Double A, in Triple A, and the majors, but it's not totally there at those levels. And even in Double A, the walks were a little bit of a problem, right? So there's some refinement that needs to happen before he becomes a star. And I think the lesson learned with Bobby Miller kind of applies here, where
Yeah.
stuff alone is not the only thing that's required to be a successful major league pitcher. And that's just to say that, and I am often the guy who's talking, I picked Wyatt Langford as a fade at the beginning of the year for that same reason. I picked Evan Carter in the offseason last year when I was on for the same reasons, right? When you get to that rarefied air, unless you are such a can't miss guy, the Wander Francos of the world to enlist a certain
He
name
missed
that
in other
shouldn't be
ways.
mentioned, but for other reasons he couldn't miss, right? But guys like that there's very, very few guys that even at the top of the prospect list are ready to contribute, right? And that's why
Yeah.
oftentimes I always talk about shopping in the bargain bins of guys that fail shortly after graduating to the majors. Joe would be someone I'd be looking to buy at the end of next year, for example, when he has a mediocre rookie season, as I expect him to have, right? I
Right.
think I don't see the Paul Skeens version of a rookie year coming for him. And
It seems may also
that's
be
probably
a
an
good
easy
point.
statement,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
get where I'm the idea I'm trying to elicit.
Sure.
And then on the crushes side, sticking with my own team on Evan's theme, I'll refer to my last pickup of the season. Picked him up at the very, very end. I've been watching the guy. Same thing in ABL, right? It's what you were talking about, which is you get in your own head. You kind of watch the guy, and you're like, oh, he did pretty well. Do I pick him up now? No, I'll wait another day. And he kind of got blown up on his, I think it was his second to last start. Where he gave up a couple runs, so his ERA kind of ballooned and didn't look quite as appealing as it had. But the name is Alessandro Ercolani. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. He's a guy from San Marino. He's from Italy, basically. And he's a guy who is, I think, 19 years old now, came over to pitching at 18 years old, has incredible arm talent, throws like 96, 97, but is basically just a guy who's it's the Hakeem Olajuwon learned how to play basketball when he was 19 kind of story. It's the same sort of thing where it's like the guy that has this incredible talent but doesn't necessarily have it fully formed quite yet. Still learning how to pitch. Has been primarily used as a reliever, but he was pitching 3, then 4 inning stints at the end of last year in high A, which is pretty high for a 19-year-old. If you look at those, the pitchers that are succeeding at that level, those are already, the guys this year with the same kind of performance he had is Jaden Ham, guys like that are, rocketing up lists and now in some top 100 lists and things like that. So
Yep.
he's probably not there yet, but I think performance next year, especially if they give him a chance to start, he becomes a pretty interesting arm. He threw 80 innings this year after I think it was about 50 the year before. You project that forward to 100 something innings next year. If he throws 100 innings with a, whatever it's a 20%, 25% K minus BB ratio, I think that's the sort of indicator that I'm looking at as 20-year-old and potentially Double A by then. That's very, very, very interesting. Notably, the way I picked up on him initially was running a lot of the filters that I do of kind of leaderboards in the minor leagues. Just I like to, scouting has its value, but I love to kind of just pick out stat lines that are interesting and then kind of scout those guys and try to read up on them and see what happens. And this guy, or Kalani, popped up on a lot of lists. If you start looking at guys with that kind of performance, that age, it's Jackson Job 2 years ago. It's Jaden Ham that I mentioned this year. It's Robbie
Yeah.
Snelling. It's these guys that we are now in love with that we maybe, that kind of popped a year later. There's relief risk there. I mean, he's a guy who's, as I said, he's very raw. They may just decide, let's get the raw stuff. They had a pretty good year this year. Maybe the Pirates just kind of rush him to the majors and say, let's just capitalize on the arm talent before he gets hurt and have him be a reliever, lights out 2 inning guy. The Andrew Miller type monster coming out of the bullpen type. That's a version of the world that they may be on, but maybe they look at that upside and that arm talent, as I said, because the strikeouts are there and the velocity is there. He's throwing 96, 97, even in those 4 inning stints. So there's reports from the end of last year, so after 80 innings, where he's maintaining that velocity. Which
This is a deep crush. I like
I always bring in the deep cuts. I remember we talked about Logan Evans and guys like that before they.
Yeah, Logan Evans had a good year. So
Yeah.
he's another guy that shot up lists. Well, that's cool. I like this the Hakeem Olajuwon of minor league. That's good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, listen, guys. Really, so glad you could each be on the show tonight. It's always hard to find a time because we're all busy with our non-baseball lives. That works for everybody, and I really appreciate it. Really interesting discussion, which I enjoyed. And it's a good way to wrap up the 2024 season on ABL Down on the Farm. And look forward to connecting with everybody when the new year rolls in and I start prospecting. Tom and I will be concocting the handbook and see who comes in number 2 behind Tom's system. So looking forward to that. And think about your Mauricio trade. And if it happens, with the impetus, the seed was planted here. So that's, I'll take credit if the trade happens later. The trade discussion started here. So that we'll keep that in mind.
But know where to find me.
Right. That's right. And in the end, for everybody scoring at home, remember to ABP. Always be prospecting.
Thank you all.
All right.